Welcome to this NEJM CareerCenter conversation on Medstro. We're here to discuss the influence that medical students are having on healthcare today. Our featured guests are, of course, 5 medical students, the first of 2 such panels we'll be talking with, and whom you'll be interacting with on Medstro. Let me introduce them. We have Steve Young from Tufts Medical School, who spent some time with the Peace Corps in Guyana. Vidya Viswanathan, University of Pennsylvania, founder of Doctors Who Create. Benjamin Mazer, University of Rochester, future pathologist. Peter Mitwitty, University of Mississippi. Surgery and sports medicine and marathons are his passions. And Christy Hawley, George Washington University, who's interested in practice innovation. Welcome to all of you. I wanted to start off with a question for Vidya. I read your Doctors Who Create interview with Lisa Sanders of the New York Times. And she was an English major and a TV producer who ended up in med school. Tell us about your journey, Vidya, to medicine.
Thanks so much. So I grew up never expecting to go into medicine. I thought, being someone who loved literature, loved writing, that medicine was completely devoid of people who did those things. And so for me, being pre-med never seemed very attractive. In high school, in college, after I graduated from college, I never thought about it even once, which is funny because both my parents are doctors. And it was really when I started seeing doctors as a patient that I realized how, even in the patient room, they had to be really creative in connecting with me as a vulnerable patient. And I saw that the way they talked about cases, if they were really good doctors, the way they thought about it was, in fact, almost like a Sherlock Holmes story. And that's why I was so excited to talk to Lisa Sanders. And so I was living abroad after college, and I just started thinking about going into medicine. And I think being abroad also helped because I wasn't really confined by like notions of who I was. I was in a completely different environment where I was almost reinventing myself. And when I came back, I heard that you could do post-bac pre-med classes. You could take the pre-med classes separately at a continuing education school. So I did that at the Harvard Extension School and, shadowed, made sure it was the right decision for me. And in the process, I ended up talking to a lot of people who had done the same thing, like Lisa Sanders. Yeah. And so it gave me a lot of confidence talking to those people. And so then I finally applied to med school, and I'm now a first year. Yeah.
And here you are. I mean, the first editor at the journal that I ever worked for his name was Franz Engelfinger, and he kept a Boswell's Life of Johnson on his desk because he was an English major at Yale, and he was the person who introduced to the world the writings of Lewis Thomas. I don't know if any of you have read The Lives of a Cell, but those were collected essays. And I highly recommend them to all of you. They were collected essays originally published in the New England Journal of Medicine, which won a National Book Award. Peter, your passion is for sports and sports medicine. What influences do you think you've had, or have you been trying to exert into the medical system already? And what gets you up and running, so to speak, after a long day's studying?
Yeah, so it's an interesting story. A bit like Vidya, I wasn't one of these who wanted to be a doctor from when I was a little kid. I actually was a bit late in the game as well. I didn't declare to be a pre-med until at least halfway through college, and I was actually a sports medicine major. I grew up overseas in this country of Turkey, lived there 15 years, and so I grew up playing street soccer, and I wanted to come to the States to go to college, and I wanted to play soccer. And so I chose sports medicine as a major. I wasn't very academically inclined at that point. I chose sports medicine because it had the word sports in it. And so I ended up being a sports medicine major, started taking anatomy and physiology courses, and really started to develop a passion for the medicine side of things. And the chair of my department was extremely supportive. And he said, "Have you ever considered medical school?" And I hadn't up until that point. So I started shadowing doctors, kind of like Vidya said, and started doing research, and that kind of really liked research as well. So that actually brought me to the MD PhD program here in Jackson, Mississippi, and I think the exercise, I think that's just something that keeps me sane for sure. I've done I think 8 or 9 marathons, and I like to run. I found an Ole Miss girl to marry here in Mississippi, and just being with her and staying fit, I think that kind of keeps you grounded. I think you need a lot outside of medicine, because that's going to be a busy career and a busy life with all the extracurriculars we're all involved with. So those things just kind of help me stay grounded.
Yeah, and so your influence on the system so far. I know none of you would say that you've taken over the U.S. medical care system yet, but it's possible that one of you will. And so, what is it that have you noticed things coming into a system as a newcomer? Are there things that you're trying to change about the system, Peter?
So, yeah, for me, I'm planning on going into a career in orthopedics, and that's really not a typical thing for MD PhD students, because surgeons typically are just folks who operate and they don't have much time for research. And everyone has told me, don't go into this field. But for me, the reason I want to become a surgeon scientist is so I can change various aspects of orthopedics. It's really not a research culture at all. I think there definitely could be an increased focus on personalized medicine, for example, within orthopedics. I think just because there is not already this culture within a field, I think does not mean you can't go into that field. And I would like to, I think there are probably 5 or 7 MD PhD applicants into orthopedics each year. So I would love to perhaps change the culture here in this medical center. As you all know, Mississippi leads the way in obesity and diabetes and all of these things, and they just opened a Mississippi Center for Obesity Research here, but it's mostly just preventive medicine. It doesn't deal at all with surgery or anything where you're going to have interventions.
Yeah.
So I would love to kind of bring this surgical culture, particularly in the orthopedics department, and apply it to how do we combat obese folks who have a traumatic injury, for example, and have worse outcomes. That's a very real thing that is not common knowledge. Everyone knows obese people have increased incidence of cardiovascular disease and diabetes, but they don't know that obese people also have longer operative times. They have worse complications, increased death rate following trauma. So I'd be very interested in going into research in that field. There's
a lot of work there. Steve, you told me as we were introducing ourselves that you spent some time in the Peace Corps in Guyana, South America. What were some of the lessons of that experience, and how do you think it's prepared you better to be a medical student?
Yeah, so I spent some time in the Peace Corps. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
I think one of the things that it really prepared me for was how to be very independent and self-sufficient. I lived in a village that was about 16 hours away from the capital on a good day in the dry weather, and it was maybe 32 hours away when it got a little bit wetter. So communication was sparse with support at headquarters. So it really taught me a lot of how to depend on your local resources and the people who know the village very well, and really build those interpersonal connections and relationships, and then using that to guide your projects in the Peace Corps. And I think that going into medical school, that's really helped me as well in finding people to talk to, and then hopefully to guide my future practice as well.
So how does that sort of dependent upon the kind of village model? How does that work at top?
Sorry, I didn't catch all of that.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. So how does that dependence on the community work out for you at Tufts? Are you an organizer among your fellow medical students, or there is a famous bar across the street from Tufts Medical School that it's a I can't quite. I think it's a German.
Jacob Wirtz?
That's right, Jacob Wirtz.
Yeah. So I know that during first year we have uh, a course called PBL, Problem-Based Learning, and our fourth year students, as well as other physicians, lead that course for us. And oftentimes we will go over to Jacob Wirtz and have more of a social, informal get-together. As well, we have these learning communities where we are broken up into smaller groups so that we have more of an opportunity to speak to other students, both the students in our class as well as the class above us and the class below us. Each of us are given sort of a one-to-one student mentor from the year above us, and then as we move forward through the school year, when the next class comes in, we are also paired up with a one-to-one mentee. So we provide sort of this guidance of what to expect, and also able to seek out guidance from our older colleagues about what to expect in the future. And then coming into fourth year, we have multiple opportunities to do a lot of mentorship with either PBL, with surgical anatomy, with medical interviewing. We start medical interviewing in first year, and that again is precepted by fourth year students. And they take us through the very basics of just how to have a conversation, not even how to take a medical history, but how to have a conversation with someone and how to build rapport, and how to make the person that you're talking to very comfortable with you, such that in the future, when you do have to ask them, more sensitive questions, they're very likely to open up to you.
Was the Guyana experience helpful in making you feel comfortable talking with people whom you've never met before and from a different culture, which is certainly true often in medicine, isn't it?
Most definitely. I think it's definitely helped me lower my sort of barriers and biases, and just listen to people. One of the things that they do out in Guyana that we do much less of is they'll talk to people randomly on the street, and they're not afraid to kind of speak their minds. So it's very, I found it very useful to have a much thicker skin, to not take what they say for, to not be insulted by anything that they say, and to just go along with the flow, and to not be judgmental with a lot of the things that they say, because it is from a different culture, and I am a foreigner there, and so I'm not there to pass on my personal beliefs of what they say. But that being said, the more that you talk with certain people, and the more trust that you build, and the more relationships that you build with them, that's when you're able to make changes and effects of talking about, oh, hey, have you considered that the things that you say may offend someone else, or have you thought about something in a different way? And that's where we're able to do the cultural exchange and the globalization of a different views. If I had just on the very first sentence said, "Oh yeah, that's very offensive. You shouldn't do that," or if I had said, from where I'm from, that's not okay. They don't know me, and I don't know them, and that kind of creates a block in the communication barrier. So I think my time there has definitely taught me to really take things slowly, and to approach communication with people that you don't know in a very open manner.
Yeah, okay. Christy, your interest is your professed interest is in practice innovation, and so how'd you get how did you get interested in that?
Yeah, so I actually have a background in healthcare policy. I worked for a think tank in Washington, D.C. before I decided to go to medicine. I had no idea I was going to do it either. A lot of it had to do with having physician mentors who were really able to use their experience with patients and their clinical background to really make big changes in national healthcare policy and with their patients. So I'd say I did my MPH at Dartmouth, which I think had a big influence on getting involved in healthcare policy. It was around the time of the ACA. A lot of my professors were down in DC working on that. So I had a lot of kind of firsthand knowledge on ACOs and kind of what was going on there. After my MPH, I decided to work at Brigham and Women's, opening a new primary care center as a primary care medical home, which I'm sure you guys are all familiar with that movement. And that kind of gave me a lot of interest in looking at how you improve systems and how you kind of take lessons that physicians have known for years and years and incorporate them into a system that actually makes sense and that you can get compensated for. So I was working on everything from the construction to helping to hire physicians. So we were working at practice flow, thinking about education for students and residents and how you kind of build a new practice model. So that's where I first got interested. And then at GW, I've just gotten involved in the American Medical Association, American College of Quality. And through that, I've just been able to learn more and more and more about how you can bring a lot of these lessons into your clinical practice.
So the Washington think tank experience must have shown you something about the way that medicine is structured by forces outside of itself. In other words, it's not all about public health. Some of it is about politics, it turns out. Is that right?
Absolutely. I actually did a fellowship on Capitol Hill for a now senator while I was in medical school. And so I've definitely had experience in Washington seeing that side of it. So yes, I think it's very important for medical students and young physicians to realize the impact that policy is really having on the way that we are going to be able to practice. And unless we get involved and unless we are advocates not only for our profession but for our patients, things might not be the way that we want them to be. And so that's a passion of mine, is getting students involved.
So there are forces that are sort of pushing the regulations in directions that, say, benefit an industry, for instance, a device or a drug industry, as opposed to saving money for the public. Did you see? I guess it's the L Street crew in Washington.
K Street.
What is it?
The K Street lobbyists.
Okay, I was thinking of South Boston, K Street. Okay, so what did you see about the lobbyists there? I mean, were you surprised at the effect of the lobbyists on the healthcare system?
Yes and no. I think my interest was more, since I have a public health background, I was looking at a lot more at kind of the broader policies and how government influences the way that we practice as physicians, or the way that we can get something covered for our patients per se. So I wasn't necessarily dealing with lobbyists as much, but looking at more about how you can use government for good or bad to influence the way that doctors practice.
Benjamin, or Ben, your interest in pathology. Do you how'd you acquire that? I see is that a microscope behind you?
Oh yeah, I'm in one of the pathology rooms. It's you can find a lot of quiet rooms in the pathology department. Yeah, so I didn't come into medical school thinking I was going to be interested in pathology. I don't know how many people know much about pathology before they enter medical school. I certainly didn't know anything about it. But I've always been interested in systems-based practice in medicine, not just as a buzzword, but the idea that the organizations that administer healthcare and provide it to people have probably as much influence on a patient's health as a single doctor working one-on-one with a patient. That's always been interesting to me. That's why I went to business school. That's why I've been involved in healthcare policy. And it's probably one of the main reasons I've been involved in pathology, which is sort of a field that sits right at the center of medicine. You communicate a lot with physicians. You provide a lot of information for patients. And so much of what you do is in that mediation, in providing diagnostic answers to people when they have these questions, interpreting all the information you're getting. And so while you may not be the one generally giving results to patients and talking to them one-on-one or guiding their treatment, you have a huge role to play in the healthcare system. And it's something that's very invisible, I think, to most physicians. They run a lab test and they get a result and they interpret it and they do what they're going to do. But they don't think about the quality of those results, the variation of those results. How did this number show up on a screen, basically? But I don't know. I don't know how much that interests other people, but it certainly interests me. And the way that number comes about, the way that diagnosis comes about, is going to have a huge impact on people's lives. So that's why I became interested.
I felt like when I was in college, I had a front row seat because I was a lab technician during the summers, and some of the more interesting hallway conversations I heard were between surgeons and pathologists, and they were not really friendly conversations often enough. But they were interesting to hear. But pathology has a long history of activism, political and social. I mean, Rudolf Virchow, in the 19th century, the famous German, the father of pathology, was a politician and a radical activist. You said that you've been to business school, and so tell me about that experience. Are you in there now, or have you finished an MBA?
I went to business school before I started medical school, so it's been a couple years. I've probably lost some of that knowledge after having to cram in a lot of medical information, but I have been involved mostly in political activism, and then issues in quality and safety in healthcare, at more of a local level. So yeah, I think pathology is in some ways kind of the search for truth in medicine. It's about not taking the status quo and sort of the common knowledge and trying to find some evidence for it. It's a very scientifically based medical practice, as you're aware. And so I can imagine that someone with that kind of passion certainly dovetails well into politics, where you're trying to use. Certainly, I've always tried to use a science and evidence-based approach to healthcare policy, to political activism. It's not enough to just have tradition. You need some kind of evidence backing it. That's the basis of pathology, and I'd love it to be the basis of healthcare policy. We probably have a while to go for that, but
okay,
that's where it dovetails for me.
Well, I wanted to ask the group, as your thoughts about activism in public service. I'm thinking specifically about the group Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, and last month's awful, or was it earlier this month? I guess it was last month's awful bombing in Afghanistan. So that sort of public service doesn't come without hazard, and I'm wondering if any of you have ever considered doing whether that sort of kind of self-sacrificial service is of any interest, or whether you know people who've done that. And go ahead, any of you can jump in.
Sure, I'll give it a shot. I think one of the reasons that I went into medical school, and part of the reason why I also did my Peace Corps experience, was to gain a global experience, and then to hopefully one day to join organizations like Doctors Without Borders and work abroad. I think that the work that they do is very invaluable, and they provide such a huge service in an area where there's very limited resources and there is so much need for the work that they do. So one of the one of the specialties that I'm considering are specialties that are going to be of very much use in those areas, whether it's emergency medicine, or if it's anesthesia, or if it's like family practice, or general surgery. I think those are things that I would consider to be of more use in a resource limited setting. And I think, I don't quite know anyone who actually did serve in Doctors Without Borders, but I think for me, it's definitely an area where I deeply consider and hold dear to myself, and hope to one day be able to serve. And I think that last month's bombing is very tragic, but hopefully very a small percentage of horrific things that could happen to groups who do such great charitable work. And I don't think it's going to stop me from considering joining and serving in areas where there's a huge need.
Well said. Anyone else have thoughts about that sort of service? Did you?
Yeah, I can chime in. So I think working globally, or even within the U.S., working in areas that have great need, and potentially, like post-disaster recovery, those sort of things really interest me, especially since before I thought about going to medical school, I was already interested in those subjects. So I took Chinese as an undergrad, and I went to China every summer, and then I went to teach English in Taiwan the year after college. So for me, I don't want going to medical school to be something where I drop those interests or that experience. I'm hoping to bring that together and make it more powerful and meaningful. So for me, this year I've been trying to meet up with a Chinese tutor to keep practicing Chinese, and my hope is to go and work in China, even intermittently, not necessarily all the time. I see that Steve also speaks Chinese, and he messaged. Yeah, so I really think that there are a lot of med students trying to merge interests that were traditionally considered outside medicine with their medical interests, and I think that it is really scary to see doctors being put in danger in these countries, but largely what I read are the good effects of their work. And I think that especially during the Ebola kind of crisis globally, you would read not just about doctors here, but doctors who heard about the spread of Ebola and went to those areas because they said, like, this is my specialty and I'm going to treat those patients. And I particularly remembered one profile of the doctors and nurses, both foreign and local, who were treating Ebola patients. And I just remembered thinking, like, these are really heroes. And I'm really excited that more and more people are interested in both global health, but also here, like, post-disaster recovery in the U.S., or even just working in resource-poor environments is not necessarily always that safe or as like notorious. Like, you might not actually, people might not know the good work that you're doing, but I think that we all kind of the people who go into those professions realize that they're doing this for the reasons of impacting those communities, not for reasons of prestige or like being well known. And so I think it attracts really wonderful people.
I agree. I agree with you. Any advice for the profession? You've got a kind of a forum here. There will be people showing up at Medstro that will be asking you questions in text, and that you'll be able to interact with. If you could say anything, any of you, about how you would like to see the profession change. And you're all in medical school, so and I'm not the dean of admissions, so I can't kick you out now. But I know that you're all worried about getting a good residency. But what advice would you give if any of you have anything that you feel passionate about? Now's the time.
Well, you know, I have been involved in trying to do my part to change the profession a little bit, and you know, I'd ideally love to see, you know, a much more unified profession. You know, I've been heavily involved in the American Medical Association, which sort of has traditionally been the voice of doctors, but it's so fractured now. Not everyone's a member of the AMA. There's disagreement. Certainly, that's what makes it so interesting and thought-provoking. But I think if doctors had a lot of professional unity, they could really do a huge amount of good. I think over-specialization, I shouldn't say over-specialization, but specialization and a lot of financial constraints that have happened in the healthcare system have made it really hard for doctors to get together and say, you know, as a profession, what can we do to make patients healthier? Certainly as individual physicians, we're trying to do that every day. Because I think if we got together as a profession, we could be extraordinarily innovative. And the AMA has taken some steps in providing grants and ideas for this. Other organizations have started to do this, but you know, overall, we're a wealthy profession. We're highly educated. You know, I'd like to say good things about doctors, and so I think we have a lot of potential. You know, I've been involved in trying to get the American Medical Association and basically the profession as a whole to come to new media and how we're going to be providing medical information through the internet, through traditional TV media, that I think this is going to be the future of providing healthcare and medical information. And I think the profession should be addressing that head-on and explicitly, whereas now everyone's sort of been beating around the bush and you know, concerned maybe about the negatives of new media and how people are getting health information, the positives. And so I think if we were more unified as a profession and we were able to address these large problems as a large group, we could do some extraordinary innovation and really help patients. But right now, I think we don't have that kind of solidarity.
I would just observe that as much work as the profession seems to need, it's done itself proud by choosing people like you to be members of it. And Steve and Vidya, Ben and Peter and Christy, I want to thank you so much for spending time with us today, and I really hope that you find a wonderful professional life in front of you. I'm thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.